welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. It is a beautiful afternoon to be indoors, so we really appreciate you being here. And also a special thank you to Sally and the Avalon Chamber of Commerce for helping us host this event. I think things like this are really exciting, and it's great to hear from the community. We're looking forward to your questions as well. I'd also like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, and that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And also, we also recognise that we live in an incredible part of this world. It is so beautiful. So I'd also like to thank the traditional custodians for caring for this country, this coastline, and these waterways since time immemorial. It's oh, good. I'd also like to note we do have a wonderful opportunity coming up this year with the Voice referendum, and it could be a wonderful opportunity to unite and heal our nation if we approach it with the same open hearts and spirit of generosity in which that invitation was given to all Australians. But here to the topic at hand. We've just this week heard the UN Secretary General talk about we've entered the era of climate boiling. And we're on track to have the hottest July on record ever. And Europe is in flames, and they're on a war footing in many places, similar to what we were a number of years ago with our Black Summer bushfires. But today we have two absolutely incredible experts here to talk about what can be done, what is being done, and how we can address climate change in a really practical way and a really realistic way. And also in a way that makes great sense economically, both at the household level and from a national perspective as well. Australia is the world's 14th highest emitter, and this doesn't include what we export. Australian households are responsible for 1/5 of Australia's emissions. So the biggest question that we're going to address today is what we can do as individuals, as families, as community, as colleagues, as businesses, what we can do to make a difference in our own lives that make a major difference on a big scale as well. So we're going to hear about the win-win situation, how it helps both our pockets, the cost of living, and also how we can get the greenhouse gas emissions down. So Saul, I'd like to start with you. And this question, I'm quite aware, could take up the whole hour and a half or even a day and a half. So we'll try not. We want to leave it open for questions as well. Saul, for people who don't know you, tell us about your time in America where you were instrumental in helping politicians there write the largest piece of climate legislation in human history anywhere in the world. And tell us also about the work that you're doing with the Australian government.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. As a nerdy little boy many, many years ago, I would never imagine having a sold-out basketball court listening to me say things. Before I get going, thank you to my sister for printing this amazing t-shirt. She's a local up here. I'm from the Southern Beaches. There's no competition at all. But thanks, Selena, for that. So I actually relocated to Australia in late 2020, early 2021. I had been living in the US since 1998. I first went there for grad school. I then moved to Silicon Valley to work on starting technology companies. Most of the technology companies I started were in energy or in robotics. So I've been working on solar and wind and electric vehicles and batteries and hydrogen for a long, long time. But in 2019, I actually remembered that I married my wife in 2008, and I remember in 2007 we had a conversation, if the world hasn't moved fast enough on climate by 2019, can I become an eco-terrorist? This explains the beard, obviously. And she said, sure, because 2019 was, we were young and in love, so that was never, we were never going to get there, because now we're old. Still in love, but old. Anyway, 2019 came around, and the world hasn't really been doing enough on climate change. And I said, can I become an eco-terrorist now? I'm perfectly well trained. I've built the infrastructure. I know how the whole system works. And she said, no, we have 2 children. You're allowed, however, to go and fight the fight that you've always complained about, that is the policy and the regulatory environment in the energy sector is against the solutions. So how do you go fix that? So I wrote a book, the book Electrify, some of you have it here, that was written at the same time I started an organization called Rewiring America with a good friend, Alex Lasky, and we were lobbying the presidential primary candidates in 2019. So these were all the Democrats who were going to try and fight Trump. And we were noticing that every time any one of them, whether it was Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, stood up and they would say the word climate change and they'd wince. And we were like, we have to change the messaging, we have to change the narrative. And because Alex and I worked on the edge of technology, we can see that the market is changing. And so we worked with all of the groups, all of the primary candidates, and Biden ended up being the one that won. I like Biden a lot. I secretly, if you ask me, I wish it was Elizabeth Warren. She was extraordinary. She reminded me more of the independents here. And that gave us the sort of an invitation to work with the White House when it came to writing their big climate policy, because we'd already been working with them and with the climate team in the White House. And thus began an 18-month odyssey with a small group of people trying to figure out how to navigate first the rules of the Senate and what the Democrats actually could do in a climate sense. So for the first 6 months, they thought they would be able to do things like a carbon tax, things like a clean electrification standard, very traditional climate policy. That was shut down when they didn't want the filibuster. I am going to give you the 1 hour answer to this question. Anyway, that got shut down because the politics wasn't going to support that type of thing, which was lucky for us because we had been advocating that the market is about to turn, so the economics of electric vehicles is getting there, batteries, solar, wind, and it should be really a bill that promotes the solutions and incentivizes everyone to go by those solutions. That ended up being, I'm a trained physicist and mechanical engineer, but learned how to hack the tax code in the US, so that was a really crazy thing. And really, the Inflation Reduction Act was an incredible tax code hack that we sort of pulled the rug from underneath the Republicans. And what do Americans like more than anything else? It's like tax deductions. So it's actually Republican-proof policy. Probably. Fingers crossed. It's really, the country is crazy over there. And anyway, that led to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was $370 billion in incentives, as scored by the Congressional Budget Office. But honestly, the bill is not capped, so Americans could take even more advantage of that. So far, Americans are taking advantage of the bill 1.5 times faster than they anticipated, so that means it'll spend probably $600 billion. And if they really spend all that is possible over the 10 years of that bill, it will amount to $1 trillion in rebates for the average American household. So every American household qualifies on average for about $23,000 in incentives to buy an electric vehicle, buy an electric stove, buy electric heating, buy electric water heaters. That represents about a half of the bill. The other half of the bill was tax incentives for industry to create those machines, make the wind power, make the solar power, et cetera, et cetera. And it was designed very much, it ends up with thousands of people working on this bill, and it was designed very much to completely transform the economy so that in the future, making the right consumer choice always is the right climate choice. And really, that was a long way of saying that's what we need to do in Australia, and that's now my project.
It is actually incredible what you helped achieve over in America. I think so many of us were gobsmacked when that Inflation Reduction Act
we were too.
Wow. And in health, we always say we've got to make the healthy choice the easy choice, and that has happened in America by getting those tax incentives and subsidies. Incredible work. So John Grimes, CEO of the Smart Energy Council, I'd love to turn to you and just hear a bit about the vision of the Smart Energy Council and also what you see, how you see Australia transitioning to that renewable clean energy future.
Fantastic, thank you. And a delight to be here, and what a marvellous day. No place better in the world to be this afternoon, I think, than Mackellar. So the Smart Energy Council's been around for a long time. We trace our history back to 1954. Actually, our members were instrumental in inventing the technology that's used today. So the solar panels on your roof, the evacuated heat tubes, the building materials and other things actually were invented here in Australia. But we didn't commercially take advantage of that multi-billion-dollar opportunity that actually was incubated here at places like the University of New South Wales. We have 1,000 corporate members through the ecosystem, and our theory of change is that the best response to the climate crisis is by linking industry, so business. Because when business is activated, business can move really, really quickly. When you get the incentive packages right, business steps in and flourishes. I cast my mind back to COVID. Remember at the beginning of COVID, they said, don't wear masks. And they said it not because it was good health advice, but because there were no masks. And so if everyone went out and wore masks, then there'd be none for the frontline health workers. And 3 or 4 months later, you couldn't trip over the number of masks that are in the marketplace. You buy a big box for about $9.90 from Chemist Warehouse, right? When the incentive's in place, industry can respond, business can respond. So 4 million solar rooftops. And that's why, actually, Sophie, I think this is so important, because I think governments are lagging when it comes to the response to climate. But business plus community can act really fast. And so don't underestimate the power that we have collectively to really change the dial. That's why we do what we do, and that's really about the Smart Energy Council.
I really look forward to exploring that a bit more, how we bring community together with business to really amplify and accelerate this transition. Saul, I think your theory of life is electrify everything. Is that right? Maybe you can expand on that. But how do you see this happening? What's your vision for Australia? How do you see us electrifying the nation?
The book that I wrote, Electrify in the US, which was really a love letter to Joe Biden or whoever was going to be the president, was called Electrify because when, I actually had been studying for years all of the energy flow through every activity in American life. And I can tell you that 0.9% of energy flow in the US is using natural gas to pump natural gas through 1.3 million miles of pipeline. 3% of US energy is using oil to make diesel and petrol in chemical refineries. 0.6% of US energy flow is used on buses to get kids to drive to school. And the reason I was looking at all of those in that enormous detail with a couple of other people was, how do you maintain doing the things that we want from those activities, like getting to school, like heating our homes, but how do you do it without any carbon emissions? And the answer for nearly every single one of those energy flows is to convert the machine at the end of the line to be an electrical machine, and to provide that with renewable energy, or in the case of the US, with nuclear or renewable energy. There are countries in the world that will not be able to get through this transition without nuclear energy. That's just a pragmatic position. And so that's where Electrify Everything comes from. It's distilling those thousands of little lines on this very complicated graph that you should be thankful I'm not showing above my head right now, into a simple set of things, sort of solutions, if you like. So as that translates to your household, 42% of the domestic emissions in Australia, meaning the emissions that happen that aren't destined for export somehow, are decisions that you make around your kitchen table. What is the vehicle you drive? How do you heat your home? How do you heat your hot showers? How do you cook? And honestly, whether or not you have solar on the roof. So that tiny set of decisions, right? So think about it. We've spent 30 years of environmentalist messaging, which was reduce, reuse, recycle, that would have you standing in the supermarket aisle, incapacitated at trying to figure out which can of tuna did the least damage. Which, I think some of those decisions are worth wrestling with, but I think if you're going to really move the whole populace, it's like, well, think about the infrastructure of your life. You're going to make 5 decisions over the next 10 years. Every one of you will buy a car, buy a water heater, buy a space heater sometime in the next 10 years. If you just make those decisions to electric, and if we continue to do a good job deploying rooftop solar, also deploy some big scale wind and solar, that's actually the recipe to get Australia to zero emissions. And then the exciting thing for Australia is that this, honestly, I always feel a little bit shy standing up next to John at these events because he's been doing this on the ground in Australia forever, so I'm a bit of an imposter stealing some of his thunder, but he was part of the movement that made rooftop solar in Australia the cheapest energy that retail consumers have ever had anywhere in the world. It's like extraordinary. So much so, we did a study that was quite influential in the US that showed that by 2030, if they go all electric, American households will save $1,000 a year or $1,500 a year. And that sounds great, but if you do the same study in Australia, it's $4,000 a year per household. And that's because if you drove an electric car here today using your rooftop solar, it's about 2 cents a kilometre instead of 26 cents a kilometre if you're using petrol or diesel that we also have to import, which is not super good for us. So the electrify everything is sort of technically true and also a simplifying way to think about how do we go through this very complicated, difficult climate transition and make good decisions.
Thanks, Saul. So, John, have you got something to add to that? I just saw you maybe wanting to add to that.
Well, just that, these are astounding figures. So if you buy a rooftop solar system, you're really buying the capital cost because there is no fuel cost. The sun is free of charge. And so it's basically a financial analysis to say, what does it cost to buy and install? And if I amortize that cost over even a relatively short period like 20 years, and we are finding solar panels now working for 25, 30, 35 years plus. But even if you do a short payback period, the cost of electricity from your solar system is coming in at about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, when you plug into the socket at home, you're buying electricity from the grid at about 35 cents per kilowatt hour. And this year, those prices are going to go up by about 25%. So we're not talking about a small marginal difference. This is a staggering difference, a massive cost saving. In an environment of out of control cost of living, in a high interest rate environment, what better thing could we do than slash our power bills and help save the planet at the same time? So it's a point worth reinforcing, I think.
Thanks, John. And it just fascinates me to hear that we had the cheapest solar power anywhere in the world. Can you let us know how did you make that happen? And what are the barriers to electrifying everything at the moment?
So the reason that solar technology has come down in cost so massively is economies of scale. We're actually building, so it's volume based, right? And it's really China that's invested in this, and the dividend is cheap solar for the entire world. But the other factor is we've actually got a really streamlined, efficient way of installing rooftop solar. Australia wins the gold medal when it comes to rooftop solar. In fact, solar per capita, Australia wins the gold medal. We have almost 1.5 kilowatts for every Australian in the country, right? That is miles ahead of where other people are. And one of the reasons why it works so well in Australia is that have a look outside. Right, you put a solar panel in somewhere in Sydney, it will produce around 4 times more energy than the best location in Germany, for example, right? So we have a natural competitive advantage. Our fantastic sunshine and wind means that collectively we have access to the world's cheapest and cleanest electricity. And think about that for a second. It's not just about the home power bill, but it's how could we harness the world's cheapest and cleanest energy to value add our exports, for example, so that we don't export iron ore as dirt, but we process it into iron pellets, very energy intensive. Guess what? Solar plus wind in the Pilbara of Western Australia makes that entirely feasible. Suddenly the value of the export goes up massively, and this is a commodity the world wants, because if you're an automotive manufacturer in Europe or in North America, they want zero carbon inputs. So, great opportunity for Australia to actually invest, to re-industrialise, to create jobs and actually grow our economy, all while being at the forefront of the solution to climate change.
Yeah, good. All right. They don't need me.
This is yes and. All of those things are true, yes. And I really want to emphasise another two reasons that Australian rooftop solar was a huge success. One was policy and one was regulatory. And so we had a policy which was the solar tax credits that incentivized Australian households to do it at the moment when solar was more expensive than the electricity grid. That was true about 2010, 2012. Now you don't even need those anymore for it to be economic. So that was part of it. And then we optimized the regulatory environment, including the way we trained the workforce to do those installations safely. And that is why Australian rooftop solar is 3 to 4 times cheaper than American rooftop solar in places where the sunlight is about the same. I really want us to understand that we will not win this fight against climate change unless we're brave enough to tackle the regulatory environment and the policy environment and the tax code, because those three things all right now favour the incumbents. They favour fossil fuels. And so we need the political strength to do that. And I think we've had a fabulous change of government, but I think they need a lot of popular pressure on them, or we're not going to do the same thing we did for solar, for electric cars, for heat pumps, for all of the solutions. And unless I've now got my new theory of change is you're screwing around the edges unless you're fixing the tax code.
There's lots there to unpick, isn't there? So what's the regulatory environment or the policy environment that we have in Australia at the moment? We have fossil fuel subsidies worth 11.4 billion. That is going towards propping up the fossil fuel industry. We need to move on from the big picture, and we will very soon. But what can we do? And I should say as well that Helen Haynes in Parliament is trying to get subsidies for home batteries and things like that, which hasn't yet. We had the subsidies for solar. We're looking to get subsidies for home batteries. What else do we need?
I think in Australia where we have a dual approach, right, in the federal government today. On one hand, really good. So setting an emissions reduction target of 42% by 2030, that's big, right? And we're going to have to all swing in behind that. Having a renewable energy target of 82% by 2030 is big. Today, we have about 36% of the stationary energy in Australia is derived from renewable energy. So that's a massive build signal, basically. But at the same time, coal and gas combined are our largest export, worth about $150 billion a year. And the government continues to approve new coal mines. So I think we can kind of keep this dual kind of one eye closed, kind of kicking the sand, thinking, oh yeah, but for only so long. And I think there has to become a reckoning. And I saw that. I've just come back from India, where I accompanied Minister Bowen to the G20 Energy Ministers meeting. So this is the G20 Energy Ministers from around the world. And I was so disappointed because the world is backsliding. They softened their language on coal. They softened their language on the build-out of renewables. They strengthened their language when it came to carbon capture and storage. And I'm concerned about it. So if you look at the driver, what's the driver? Time is up. I found a fantastic resource. I only found it recently. I'm sure many of you are aware of it long before that. It's called the carbon clock. And it measures how much time have we got left on the current emission profile until we breach 1.5 degrees. Well, the scientists say there's probably enough in the atmosphere already to kind of, with momentum, take us past 1.5. But put that aside, the scientists say, IPCC report says, we have 5 years, 11 months, and 21 days. Now, that's all of the carbon. So if you said, okay, well, there are things like aviation that are going to take time to decarbonise, or fertilisers in agriculture, crikey, Mikey, right? This is a big, big problem. And so I think internationally, we're not doing enough. I think nationally, we're partway there, but we're really not confronting the elephant in the room. And that's why I think these initiatives to electrify communities, for communities to take their destiny into their own hand, it all comes down to us. There was only ever us. And us acting collectively can do extraordinary things.
I'm in the unfortunate position of having to criticise the people I try to work with. Love you, Uncle Joe, but the IRA is about half of what you need for what used to be the target for 1.5 degrees, which was net zero 2030, zero 2050. Remember, we didn't actually do anything between 2018 and now, so we only went up. So actually, the target for zero now is 2040. 42% enshrining in policy was good, except when you inherit 26% of that as dubious carbon credits from the previous government. I think it's super underwhelming, and our government is not on target. And that 42% wasn't enough anyway, which is just, but I can say that as the criticism, but the reality is Australia can get there first and over the line first, and we can do it in a way that's economically beneficial. So my actual theory for change is Australia really makes this public policy and goes hard at it, and we will increase the ambition of the rest of the world. So my experience in the US was, we've got no chance, and then we make the IRA happen. As soon as the IRA happened, Australia's like, what do we do to respond? Europe's like, what do we do to respond? China's like, what do we do to respond? So our only real chance now is to increase our ambition by, at every political opportunity, wherever it happens to be in the world, increasing the political ambition. And I do want to say it's up to you, and I hope you follow that 5-step plan I had earlier, but it's still, we're not going to win, and what you can do alone is not enough unless we change the politics and we get into the tax code and we fix the policy and we fix the regs. And we have to continually demand and call foul when the government says, we're doing everything, 42%. No, you inherited 26% of those in dubious tree tax credits from the previous government. Let's do better.
I'd just like to add, it's interesting, we've had a couple of meetings in Canberra as well. We've had the ambassador from the EU, Germany, and from the US as well.
Sorry, I forgot something. So the diesel tax credit in Australia, which is $11 billion a year, so you have to pay $1.80 a litre for diesel, but if you're a mining company, you're allowed to pay $1 or $1.10, and that's about 8 or 9 billion out of the 11 billion. The great majority of that diesel is actually running, guess what? An electrical generator, because the machines that are being used on all of the mine sites run on the magical energy source of the future, electricity.
Most polluting.
Most inefficient way to generate, even worse than coal, is turning diesel into electricity. And we just got to, there's no political ambition in sight to stop doing that stupidity. So we are literally giving foreign-owned companies a $13 billion discount instead of helping you lower your energy bills, right? We should be marching on Canberra with burning effigies.
I agree. Ending those fossil fuel subsidies, it's the number one step. It's huge. So and the government does respond to mandates from the community. So it's something that if we're vocal about, aware of, and keep talking about, then that's how action happens. I'd also like to just dig in. I think I was talking about a couple of other motivations that we're seeing in Europe for this transition to happen more quickly. And we saw with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia that a lot of those European countries went back to coal, gas, nuclear. But speaking to a lot of those ambassadors more recently, that's also given them an incentive, a motivation to get off fossil fuels as quickly as possible, because it's an energy security issue. If you have renewables and building, then you have energy security for your country, and building relationships with and supply chains with lots of friendly countries, I should say. Saul, I'd like to just expand with you. I know we've got the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, happening in America. America needs resources, don't they, to make this happen? And Australia is home to 9 out of the 10, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, 9 out of 10 of the critical minerals that are required for this renewable energy transition. So can you speak about what's happening with these partnerships with other countries in Australia, and how we can move beyond that whole dig it and ship it mentality into that value add and have a really prosperous future for Australia?
It's an excellent question. I'm going to turn it into two questions. The start of your question was talking about the Ukraine war. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, Bill McKibben, does anyone know Bill McKibben's writings? He called me and said, this is our chance, because there's a chapter in the Electrify book which says that America's not serious unless it uses the Defense Production Act to have government invest in industry to really rapidly scale up industry it was originally used to fight Hitler. And so America went from having no aircraft to being able to make 40,000 aircraft a month in the matter of 3 years. We need that level of effort. Today, America is underproducing electric vehicles by about 6 to 1, so we need a 6-fold increase. We need a 5-fold increase in induction cooking, basically 5 or 6 times manufacturing of everything. Anyway, we got the third piece of climate legislation you didn't see, but maybe actually quite consequential, is we got the Defense Production Act intoned in the US, including money for US industries to produce heat pumps, solar energy systems, battery systems, so that they could supply Ukraine and Western Europe so that they wouldn't need Russian gas for the war. But now you've got the precedent of using the Defense Production Act to fight a war. Let's actually go fight the war on climate properly. That would be the goal. As for what do you need for this transition, Australia has all of them. We don't have 9 out of 10. We've really got 10 out of 10. We've got the first, second, third, or fourth best supply of all of the elements you will need for this transition. The big ones, honestly, are ones that we're already good at: iron, aluminium, and then there are the other ones, lithium. It's not really, we should be yelling this from the rooftops. Australia shipped 55% of the world's lithium last year. We're already winning the battery game, except we aren't. So this is where you have to again think about policy. We're going to ship the lithium across the world. This wonderful, very, very valuable material, so valuable it's worth $40 a kilogram when the battery's dead. And we're going to sell it once, we're going to make a few dollars a kilogram, and then America's going to recycle our aluminium for perpetuity. So I'm concerned that think about, this is another extraordinary thing. I could electrify your whole life, and it will mean that you need to have about 10 kilograms per year of lithium, 10 kilograms a year of batteries, 10 kilograms a year of solar, 10 kilograms a year of wind, and that would supply you with a completely renewable lifestyle that looks quite similar to your lifestyle today. Compare that with 16,000 kilograms of carbon, which is what you do today. So we could be nearly post-mining at the end of this century, because we're just going to be recycling these things, right? Windmills are made out of steel, solar cells are made out of glass, silicon, aluminium. Like, these things are things that we really know how to recycle beautifully. My concern as Australia is now we're going to enter into this, and we should be really excited about the opportunity, but we should be thinking not the immediate gold rush, but we should be thinking, okay, also should we be leasing our lithium to China, creating recurring revenue? Should we have a sovereign wealth fund like Norway, which is already 80% of electric vehicle sales in Norway come from having a sovereign wealth fund, which was cleverly using their depleting fossil fuel resources? Like, we have to do these types of decision making, not just celebrate the gold rush.
John.
This is a massive business opportunity for Australia. In March this year, the Smart Energy Council took 34 member companies across to India. And India is really moving on this stuff. They've got a target of 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. Massive target, right? And when we arrived there, we were mobbed at every level, from the state governments, from the companies involved, from the national government as well. And I recently went back to those 34 companies and said, how did it go? What are the real business opportunities coming out of that visit in March? And when I totaled it all up, I almost don't want to say the figure because it sounds like hyperbole, right? It sounds unbelievable. But in the advanced pipeline or in closed sales, so these are smart Australian companies that are doing rapid rollout of solar farms. They're doing power electronics for connecting big things to the grid. So very diverse, like smart Australian innovation. The total value of business done in the pipeline since March, 1 billion Australian dollars. And so if you want to support Australian, industry, jobs, license our technology to the world, there are massive opportunities that are just sitting there waiting to be picked up. And all we just need is a bit of government support and a bit of wind in our sails, and it's really transformative.
But beware, the hydrogen industry wants that support, and it's a bad idea. One of the reasons we justify hydrogen is we're going to sell hydrogen to Korea or Germany or Japan to make steel with. The energy cost of coal or natural gas as it goes in, my first degree was in metallurgical engineering. My first job was in a blast furnace in Newcastle, so I kind of know this stuff. The energy cost of gas or coal in making steel is about 0.5 to 1 cent per kilowatt hour equivalent. The government stretch goal of $2 a kilogram from hydrogen is about, honestly, 12 cents a kilowatt hour equivalent. And the cost of steel is half determined by the cost of the input energy. If you send hydrogen without iron ore across the world, just don't think about how crazy that is in the beginning, to then make that steel, it'll be 5 to 10 times as expensive as the steel that we buy today. The market will not accept that. What we really should be doing is using the 0.5 to 1 cent a kilowatt hour solar and wind electricity that we will be able to produce later this decade to produce that steel here. And it was a nice big number that the economists say it's fancy, or we can't get rid of our fossil fuel industry because it's worth $150 billion a year. But you only make a small margin on fossil fuels because it's a commodity, so we probably make less on that $150 billion than the $50 billion we pay for the oil. So it's already net negative, as opposed to if we just processed all of our iron ore into steel in Australia, it would be more than a $1 trillion export, right? We just have to get, we don't even need to do the really fancy manufacturing stuff. We just need to make steel and aluminium and copper and nickel and cobalt and lithium into metal, and we win.
And add in some long-term decision-making and political thinking.
Stop giving handouts to Twiggy. I mean, honestly, the last federal budget was Twiggy Keeper. $2 billion for hydrogen, which was $2 billion we weren't giving the Australian people to decarbonise their homes, which is a technology you can roll out today, and hydrogen is a maybe if they maybe.
So,
It should be class warfare. I'm seriously burning effigies.
Twiggy. Let's talk about then, we've been talking big picture, let's talk about these subsidies, how we do decarbonise our homes. I think that's why we're here as well, particularly. What do people need to do to decarbonise their homes? What are the steps? What are the barriers? What are the incentives? And what are the cost savings for people? Would you like to start with that, Saul or John?
I'm super happy to. So the barrier, if you have a rooftop and you can have solar at 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour and you're buying electricity from the grid at 35 cents a kilowatt hour, and magically tomorrow, average Australian household has 1.9 vehicles in its driveway. I'm going to pretend that the people of the Northern Beaches are average for the rest of this conversation. In your average home with 1.9 electric vehicles, you'd be saving about $3,000 a year on petrol and diesel. You would be saving about $500 a year on running your hot water and your stove, and depending if you heat your house or not, depends on whether it was well built recently or it was built like my house in Thirroul in the 1970s and it's got no insulation, you can save money on the heating bills. So that's where the $3,000 or $4,000 a year in savings can come from. The problem that most Australians honestly experience, so in this crowd, most people could probably go and pay cash for about $100,000 worth of things that would have them saving money tomorrow. Or you have a good credit rating and you could borrow the money, or the next time you mortgage your house, you could add it to the home loan and you'd be able to embed those savings. And that's great for you, but 50% of Australian households don't have the credit rating and the access to the banking and the finance. And you don't half solve climate change. And this is why at the end of the day, you have to be thinking about the political pressure required to really change the politics of this. When you buy a fossil fuel machine, you buy a cheap machine, but you're committing to paying for fuels far into the future. This renewable energy transition is substituting finance for fuels. The reason that the American Inflation Reduction Act, the world's largest climate bill ever, is called something wonky like Inflation Reduction Act. Why is it called the Inflation Reduction Act? For the last 40 years, fossil fuels, the price increases at roughly the rate of inflation. That shouldn't surprise you. It makes up the basket of goods in the consumer price index that literally defines inflation. Whereas if you buy all of these electric things and you finance them at an interest rate, you have a fixed repayment for the next 20 years that those machines exist. So you're inflation proofing your home when you do these things. But it really is to emphasize we have to have new ideas about how we're going to finance the whole nation and how you do the entire population. Because it is, right now particularly, the electric cars, you've probably noticed, are about $10,000 more. The electric stove might cost you $1,000 more once it's installed. You will save the money, but again, hot water heaters have a habit of failing in the middle of the night when your wife's pregnant. And are you ready to not have showers for a month while you wait for a tradie to show up to install it? And the car is your car is going to break down just before you really can afford the electric one. And what are you going to do? Not drive the kids to school? So we need, honestly, to very much think about how we're going to finance all Australian households. Macroeconomically, we can do it, but what are the details of embedding that into our political and regulatory system so that we can help everyone get there? Social housing, everyone.
I just want to reinforce a really important point that Saul's made there, and that is that when we make choices around hot water or around heating or what have you, we often look at the sticker price. And the sticker price to put in a new instantaneous gas hot water system or a sort of an old-fashioned electric system, $2,500 maybe, to put in a heat pump hot water system might be $5,000, $4,500. And so when you're not planning for that, what do? You've maxed out the credit card, what do you do? But that sticker price does not take into account that long, dirty and expensive tail. And so it's really short-term thinking. And so a heat pump is like, for hot water, is like magic. Hot water is about 20% of your energy bills. And a heat pump, you can put in 1 kilowatt hour of electricity and get 4, 5, 6 kilowatt hour equivalent of hot water out the other side. It's actually magic, right? It uses the energy differential of the air.
When he says magic, it means science.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Also, I want to give you credit. I love that we actually do this comedy duet often. And at the last conference we're at, you said this magical thing, which I think really summed it up beautifully. It's like, when you buy solar cells, you're buying 20 years of free energy up front.
That's right.
And actually, we just got to get in that mindset of all these things, and how do we finance them?
That's right. And so Saul's point's really critical. If we can give people an easy access to finance, because the cost of the repayments are less than the savings you're going to make over time. You are net positive. You could be net positive 20 or 30% on day one, right? And that's what we need to do. If we're going to turbocharge the transition, that's really critical.
So thank you both. Let's drill down into what households actually would need to do to be fully electrified. How can they reduce their emissions? What are the steps people need to take, and how would they do that? We're sort of saying, as you said, the water heater might blow up in the middle of the night when your wife is pregnant. So what do we need to do, and what are those steps, and what are the different appliances and things that we look at?
I love this question. I used to sort of show all of these wonky graphs, and a guy came up to the end of one of my talks and said, I love it, but I've already done it. I've just made a plan for actual zero emissions for my household by 2026. And I'm like, great, tell me what it is. And he's like, we already got solar, so we're saving money there. We know we'll save enough money in the next 2 years that we're going to replace the water heater and the induction stove in 2020. This was in 2021, so he's going to do that this year. If he's in the audience, I hope you're holding to that plan. So put the solar on, save enough money to do the water heater and the cooktop. Then he was going to wait another couple of years, because I think he predicts 2024 is when the battery is going to be cheap enough to expand the solar system, and then do the heating system, because that's when he's planning the renovation for the house to change the heating system for the house. And then he said, as a reward in 2026, I'm going to buy myself the electric vehicle. And I was like, okay, that's a bit weird. You've saved money on the electric vehicle first. But it turns out he's waiting for the VW bus electric. So, but I actually love it. Think about that, after reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, if we can all suffer a little bit more, eventually we'll be good citizens. Here's a 5-step plan. He's achieved it by 2026 with his household. There are 0 emissions for everything except their banking and their eating. And so this is, every single household will take a different journey. Some will start with an electric bicycle, at least I hope so. Some will start with a water heater. You'll often find that if you're going to have the electrician on site to install one of these things, you may, if he's going to be there to put in the high current circuit for the vehicle charger, you may as well do the kitchen at the same time, because that'll save the tradie rolling the truck another time. But just, I think the correct speed to hit a 1.5 degree target is to just make sure you don't buy another machine that burns fossil fuels. And so I want everyone in Australia to panic, get upset, get ready to march on Canberra, and then make 5 good decisions over the next 15 years. So it's really weird. Like, we've got to get frothy and anxious and angry and impatient to make 5 good decisions in the next 20 years.
Let's talk about gas. Actually, gas can make
my favourite topic.
Yeah. Now, the gas industry's done a great job on us all, right? They tell us that it's natural gas, right? Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Highly polluting fossil gas. It's methane that they pipe around the place. You might know methane. It's the thing that is about 60 times more potent in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So it leaks everywhere. There are bad health impacts now being shown for the use of gas in homes. So if you can shift your hot water, your space heating, and your cooking top off gas, you get a free bonus, and that is you get to cut the gas connection. Because with a gas connection, like an electricity connection, you're getting charged a daily fee for having the connection in place. In places like Queensland, it's about $530 a year, right? So think about not just the saving. And gas now is one of the most expensive fuels. Ukraine sorted that. And solar's the cheapest, right? So the opportunity to do that switch is phenomenal. I'd just like to, Sophie, just point out one local business. David, who I met just before this, and David and I have had something to do with each other before. David runs a local paint business. Their electricity bill was $24,000 a year. Now, he took the steps in his business to electrify and to use renewable energy. He now has a net negative power bill. He runs 3 EVs. So you can do this in your home, and you can do this in your local business as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, I know it's super wonky, and I was once giving a talk, and I showed all the equations, and someone said, every time you show an equation, you lose half the audience. Turns out every time you measure regulations, you lose half the audience too, but I'm going to try it anyway. You talk about gas disconnection. I was talking to a neighbour yesterday. She proudly told me she's done everything except the water heater. There's complicated architectural reasons why she hasn't done that yet, and she's now in the absurd situation. She's paying $1 a day for the gas connection to use 15 cents worth of gas. Now, the Australian Energy Regulator, governed by the Australian Energy System market bodies, which are quite frankly not fit for purpose, has granted the gas companies the right to charge you $1,156 and something cents if you wish to abolish the gas. I mean, take your pipes, I don't want them, they're killing my children and my pets, off my property. You would then have to pay them. It wasn't conferred with the property title. This was given to them by the Australian government. That's an extra $7 billion we could add to this project of decarbonising the nation. I don't think we should have to pay.
Let's march on Canberra, Saul.
See, thank you.
Can I can I add in there as well? We recently had a team strategizing session, and what's going to be our focus over the next 12 months, and the theme is getting off gas, and that doesn't just mean electrify our homes or that type of thing, but it means what can we do at the policy level to really move our country off gas. It's time.
I want to mention one more thing, because you mentioned David, and I know David, I love David, and I wanted to paint my house with his paints, but I couldn't do it. But next house. This is to tie David and his paint store to the regulatory challenge in Australia. David produces, but inferred by the fact he has a negative electricity bill, is the fact that he makes more electricity than he can use in his local business. Not everyone on the northern beaches owns a lovely large single family home. There's a lot of renters, there's a lot of multi-tenant housing, there's a lot of strata that probably won't have enough roof area to produce all the solar for that company. Now, David could kindly say, and I'm sure he would because he's a lovely man, he's looking at me, community, I'd sell that to you for a few cents. But he's not allowed to do that under the existing rules of the Australian electricity market for anything less than the market price of about 35 cents. We should be treating David, we should be treating your rooftops the same way we treat all of the other generators in the system. And if we did so, we could much, much more fully utilise our community resources. You'd have solar maxed out on the roof of this building and every other commercial building, and quite a lot of the heavy lifting for decarbonisation for those houses that don't have enough roof would be done in their local community, and that energy will be far cheaper. But again, only if we have the political willingness to take on the gas industry and the fossil industry in the fight over the regulatory environment.
We're going to move soon to questions from the audience, but I've just got a couple more things. John, was there something you'd like to add to that?
I just wanted to call out a couple of great companies at the back of the room. One of them is a member company of ours, Allume, and they put in, so you put a solar system in your multi-unit tenant complex, and they allow you to meter and apportion the use to individual owners. So it's kind of a really neat way of really accounting for that, and they're working on things like electric vehicle charging solutions as well. And the other one, which was fantastic, the company is SoulShare. And what they do is that they allow you to invest in somebody else's solar system. So you can't have one, invest in someone else, and they're getting an average return of about 7.5% by actually enabling that transaction to happen. So there are lots of solutions that people who can't have direct access can still participate in.
Incredible. Thank you. Thank you for being here to those companies as well. And we're talking a lot about solar and solar solutions and solar on our homes. What else can people do? I know that there's a very simple solution that we haven't mentioned, and that's switching our energy providers, and that's a 5-10 minute conversation.
Look, really fantastic. This is something the federal government's done really well. It's a website called Energy Made Easy. You go on there, and actually all of the retailers are compelled to participate. You put in your details of your residence, your bill, and it will show you what are the plans available. You may find, typically people are finding savings of about $700 a year straight away by doing that. Then I would encourage you to look at providers that are zero carbon, right? There are providers, retailers, that actually tap into big solar and wind farms to other hydro assets and other things to provide zero carbon electricity as well. So big savings people can make immediately.
And it sounds like everyone's journey is very different. It doesn't have to start with solar, does it? 100% doesn't have to start with solar. It can start with your heating, your gas cooker, all those different things. So everyone's journey is different. It's just being aware that every time there's an appliance that might need changing, you're aware that there is another alternative. So you're not buying into that 10 or 20 years.
Or to highlight another company that's here that's around the corner, Fons Electric, Australian-made, well, not all Australian-made, but partially Australian-made electric bikes and motor scooters. And honestly, the fastest way to save money is use electricity instead of petrol. So they're great.
Sophie, I've got to tell this story really quickly. In March in India, we went to a factory, Ola factory. They make scooters. When I say scooters, I don't mean like the ride-on scooters. I mean like the Vespas, right? And they're producing these Vespa. They've got a range of about 180 kilometres per single charge. They use cells from South Korea, really great quality scooters. They're producing them currently one every 30 seconds, but as they ramp up, they'll be producing them one every 2 seconds off the production line. And the drive-away price in India for one of these scooters, fantastic, does a top speed of 100 kilometres an hour. I know because I maxed it out. And the drive-away cost 2,500 Australian dollars, right? Get them here now.
Why aren't they here?
Well, and
Australia's road regulations.
That's right. Well, the good news is we're able to present directly to the Energy Minister in India this opportunity. We had the special expert counsel in the White House for Energy, expert advisor, and she said, I'm getting one. I'm writing it to the White House. So we can change the rules. We will. But that's what we need. So EVs can't just be for rich people. It has to be a bottom-up revolution as well, not just a top-down one. They had a special track set out for us, but it was long enough to go pretty fast.
But that's exactly right. Electric vehicles also means electric bikes, all sorts of things, scooters, different things. Anyo, are we ready for questions from the audience? Would anyone like to ask a question? There's lots of questions up the back there. While Anyo's getting there. Oh, no, we're ready.
Thank you for organizing this great event. My question is to Sophie. When do you organize a march to Canberra?
When do you...
Yes. I like your shirt too.
Whenever you're ready, guys, whenever you're ready. But I should say there are going to be different events. Just coming up is actually, I think it's Doctors for the Environment are going to be having a demonstration in Canberra about Beetaloo and the middle arm. So it's always there. And the more people speak, the more conversations you have, the more that you make your voices heard. Governments do respond to what the people want, and so the mandate comes from the people. So I urge you as well to keep speaking up, speak to me, but also speak to all the ministers and do whatever you can. Thank you.
I would add, Sophie, just to say, when we're served up with something that is a choice that is unconscionable, right, then we have the freedom to make another choice, right? That's what this local community has done. And that is hard, right? You're taking a leap of faith in that, but there's huge power in that as well. Keep going is what I say.
Hi. Yeah, just hydrogen, a bad idea, right? Does that include green hydrogen? Like, I got a lot of people telling me you should hear about green hydrogen. It's a great thing. Is that just another load of bull dust?
Can I jump in, Saul? Sorry, really quickly. Saul and I didn't want to kind of get into the nerd and kind of think, what Saul's saying is right? For transporting hydrogen around the world, absolutely not. But there are some use cases that do make sense. And here's one. You take solar and wind and you create renewable hydrogen, zero carbon hydrogen. You add nitrogen from the atmosphere, about 80% of the air around us is nitrogen, and you create renewable ammonia. Now, renewable ammonia is great because it's the cornerstone of fertiliser. And in agriculture, in fertiliser, all that fertiliser is made from fossil gas. It's very hard to abate emissions in agriculture. So use renewable ammonia to actually make renewable fertiliser. There's a business case that makes sense. So it's not that all business cases don't stack up, it's just that many that are hyped, I think, all don't.
And about 1.2% of all the world's energy goes to make ammonia via the Haber-Bosch process. So you can't really get away with not doing that with renewably generated or green hydrogen. There's a few other little things that we can probably do with green hydrogen. It might be 5% of the future world mix, not 50%, which is the gas industry's hobby horse, the International Energy Agency's version. So, yeah. But it's not all a bad idea, and in fact, Australia should be producing so much wind and solar that there will be periods where the cost of electricity is negative, and that is a perfect time to make some hydrogen to solve some of the harder to decarbonise. It's just, I'm really just fighting to not have hydrogen be Australia's response to the IRA, because we have bad agents in the Australian political system, including the entire gas industry, that's lobbying Canberra every single day while we are not marching on it, saying, can we have a subsidy for hydrogen, please?
Hear, hear.
My name's Keith Woodward. I'm another mechanical engineer, by the way. But last November, my partner Lindy and I moved from a lovely location in the spotted gum remnant forest because it was so shady, and moved to a north-facing house at Newport with a 30-degree roof on it, sloping roof, so great for solar panels. Got the panels installed in 2 weeks, rather. Took 5 months for the electricity people to install the solar meter. When it did get installed, we were less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour for our money. We're still pleased. The first bill over 3 months was a net $170, and I did buy an electric car as soon as the panel started working and giving me good electricity. But a kilowatt's not a kilowatt. So, how can someone be charging a ridiculous fee for us to buy some electricity off them, and then we get less than 1 cent per kilowatt for what we generate?
I would say local kilowatts will always have an advantage. So if I'm not trying to sell the book in the back, but if you want to buy one, you can. But in the quarterly essay, it'll show you a breakdown of Australian electricity by all of the pieces of the cost. So if you're paying the average cost in Australia, this is how quickly everything's changing. It was 28.5 cents when I wrote the book. It's probably 32 cents now. 2 or 3 cents is for the very long distance transmission lines. About 9 cents is the average cost of generating from coal and gas. And about 9 or 10 cents is the cost of the local poles and wires, what they call the distribution network, and another couple of cents for some environmental levies that are put on the electricity. If my mate Dave has a spare electricity from his workshop that he might want to sell you for a couple of cents, all he should really be paying is for a little bit of the local distribution lines. It will always be true that the cheapest electricity will be as close as you can, which is why we should be maxing out our rooftops in our commercial buildings, using our schools, all of the other resources in the community, even our car parks. And in fact, we can get the great majority of Australia's electricity just from those things. This is in marked contrast to the government's out of the gate electricity policy, which says, let's build transmission lines, let's focus on the REZs, the regional energy zones. Both of those things are good ideas. It'll be 5 to 10 years before either of those are really hooked up and connected into the grid and giving us electricity, and in the short term, they perversely increase the price of electricity, even though eventually it'll be lower. It's not a terrible strategy to have that, but we could be eliminating emissions much, much, much faster if we understood that Australian residential rooftops, Australian commercial rooftops are actually part of the national energy infrastructure now. We give privileged financing to the big companies to do those big fancy projects out there, yet the government is not giving you privileged finance to use what really should be considered as Australian energy infrastructure. The net capacity of all of the Australian cars when they're electric will be 5 to 10 times the size of the Snowy project. Yet we're not giving you the same incentives to put that storage online as we are to the Snowy project. We will get what we regulate, and we will get what we push for and what we fight for.
2 really quick things, Sophie. The first is rooftop solar is now amazing, right? In South Australia, there are days when the whole state is powered from rooftop solar alone. Not the big solar farms or the big wind farms, rooftop solar alone. So the little things together turn into big things. But there is a statistic that I learned. I was shocked to hear this. Around 30% of your electricity bill is a marketing charge, so that your energy company can tell you how good they are and why you shouldn't swap to another energy company. That's unbelievable.
Thank you, Australian Energy Regulator, AER.
So even if the cost of electricity was free that you're pushing into the system, you'd still be paying 30 cents a kilowatt hour by the time you total the things up that Saul just talked about. That's why the distributed local energy is just so cost effective and important.
I'm just going to jump in quickly with a question is about the bidirectional flow of electricity from car batteries, and also about, can you talk to us a bit about community batteries as well? The government has decided that Warriewood is a good position for a community battery trial. How do you see those working in the future?
we should let the market decide. There's sort of 4 or 5 different places you could put the batteries. You could put the battery out at the wind farm, but then to get electricity to and from that battery, you have to pay all of those big distribution charges. You could put the battery, the community battery is currently conceived of as a giant box near the ugly zone substation. I don't know where you've hidden the zone substation here, but they put it behind the railway tracks traditionally. You don't have a railway, so I don't know how you do it. You should think about an electric railway up here. It'd be really nice. Sorry, I'm just being cheeky. So a lot of people are putting the battery on the house. The problem with putting it on the house, it has to meet all these building code standards and fire code standards, so they end up being quite expensive. So you might be paying $1,000 or $1,100 a kilowatt hour for the battery on the side of the house. The amazing thing is that batteries going into cars right now are going into them in the factories at about $100 a kilowatt hour. Maybe in Australian dollars, maybe $150 a kilowatt hour. So the car is a very good place to put the battery because it's super cheap there, and the regulatory environment dictates ultimately you'd like more batteries than the one at the zone substation. You'd like them every 3rd pole because you actually want to manage the voltage all the way across the network. So there's still a little bit of a technical fight, but unfortunately it's a technical and a regulatory fight, as I indicated by a car battery is so much cheaper than a home battery, even though the cells are largely similar. That said, we've got to figure this out really quickly, which is why I'm promoting communities piloting all the different versions so that we could hopefully in 1 or 2 years have concrete answers for this that we could design and write policy around. Whereas right now it's a little bit of a question about where the cheapest battery will ultimately be. But it's definitely almost certainly not going to be the one at the wind farm.
John?
In the medium to long term, using our vehicles as batteries on wheels that you can plug into your home. Already in the US, the F-150 truck can power your home for about 3 or 4 days, right? So they have big batteries in them, 40 kilowatt hours plus. Whereas, if your home setup, it might be 10 kilowatt hours or below. So in the long term, there's a lot we've got to figure out before we get there. How we're going to do that, what the technical, how they're going to talk to each other, how that's going to work. But I think the projections show that by 2030, we've probably got sufficient electric vehicles in the community to actually carry the entire electricity grid, right? In the short term, though, I think there is an argument for some subsidies and support for small-scale behind-the-meter batteries for householders. And I say that not because... So the problem is we've got heaps of solar in the day, so there's very low demand in the day. The sun goes down, everyone comes home from work and school, and the electricity spikes, right? It's very expensive electricity to deliver. If we can time shift from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and that for some people might only be 3 or 5 kilowatt hours, doesn't have to be a huge, it's just a little bit of time shifting, doesn't have to be a whole load, right? Then that could be fantastic because people will make a private investment. They'll put up 2/3 of the capital. If the government can kick in 1/3 of the capital very cheaply, right, we can actually get those people over the line. So I think there is an argument for subsidies for small-scale batteries, and it's something we're exploring at the Smart Energy Council.
Hi, Saul. It's a question for your mate Dave here. Instead of trying to sell his excess electricity back to the grid, is there not a way that he could bequeath that to the people that work for him, to his employees, in lieu of payment?
I think it's an excellent question. Don't think less of me. I actually spent the day with Andrew Bragg a couple of days ago, who really, on all sides of the political landscape in Australia, there are champions for electrification that are thinking clearly, including Andrew Bragg. He's actually just initiated a Senate inquiry into household electrification, which I think will be a fantastic forum for all of these issues to come up and hopefully make this a bipartisan issue. And he came to tour our community, 2515, because he wants to see what on-the-ground retail demand for these solutions look like. He would have loved to have been here today to see the passion and the turnout. And the first place we visited wasn't Dave, but a friend of his who runs an architectural woodworking facility in Corrimal, I think. And he has 90 kilowatts on the roof, absolutely more than satisfies all of the loads for all of the machines, and he now has his electric car on it and is trying to find incentives to get the employees to charge the cars. This question is almost exactly the same as the previous question, where should the batteries go in the community? Honestly, the most important thing for balancing the grid in the future of Australia is charging the cars during the day. So if we expect that we're all going to charge at home, off our homes, we all go out and do a day's work, everyone comes home at 6 o'clock, it'll be even worse version of the problem. And so what we really also need to be doing is thinking about and incentivizing how do we make sure there is a huge amount of electric charging infrastructure at our places of work and at the places we spend time during the day, whether it's community centres, libraries, shopping centres, etc. Dave's paint facility. So we should have a huge number of chargers there. But we should let Dave answer his own question.
I have about 5 people who have been waiting patiently, and I will get to you, Dave.
Wouldn't it be great? What a great perk, where you drive your car to work, then you power it up at work, then you drive it home and it powers you home overnight, right? What a fantastic perk, right? And talk about trying to attract and retain talent.
My mate Curtis, who's a fiery, he actually drives to the fire station in Hurstville and he charges his car for free and does just that.
Okay. Nigel.
Hi everybody, it's Nigel Howard. Thank you, Sophie, for raising the cars issue, and thank you for the fulsome answers. All of that was excellent. But my question now is to thank Saul for raising the question of regulation, because it's a key part of the problem that we fail at almost every time. Last September, we could have updated the National Construction Code for homes to net zero. It would have produced 4 times faster emissions reduction. It would have put solar on every new roof from new, and it would have made every single new home more affordable because the energy savings are 5 times greater than the additional mortgage costs, and we didn't do it. So on regulation, are there any other aspects that you think we need to fix? Thank you.
We build the world's worst housing in Australia. People come from North America and Europe and they come to Australia and they freeze to death, right? And that's because it's twigs and big gaps and single panes of glass. It is cheapest common denominator. It was churn and burn. It's about quick term profits, and those real estate developers love it and they fight hard for that to continue, and we shouldn't accept it.
Well, then, while you're like AEMC, AEC, ESB, we have regulatory agencies that are not fit for purpose. They were designed 20 years ago for a very different universe. We just have to, really seriously trim the bush here.
Thanks for your really interesting talks. My question follows on to the community battery question. So I think approximately 25% of people in the Northern Beaches already have solar panels, and they probably will have more soon. And we're going to be having a hotter summer, so there'll probably be more blackouts. So how do people, and also with feed-in tariffs going down and down and the cost of electricity going up, what can we do to try and get community batteries in our suburbs? And who do we ring? Who do we ask? Is it state government? Is it federal? I think a lot of us would love community batteries close to us so we can get all our daytime storage and then use it in the evening. How do we make this happen?
The federal government came forward in the last election with the policy of community batteries across the nation. I don't forget how many there are, 200 odd. Right. Right. Okay. So two that have just been installed. So they could expand that program, but honestly, it's probably not the most cost-effective way to go. And so it's a good example of governments do tend to do this, make announcements without consulting the energy experts to figure out what actually is the best solution, and that might have happened in this case. But that's not to say we need energy storage at every scale, everywhere, all at once, again and again and again. So everything is going to help. But there is more that we can do, would be my view.
Yeah. It would be more cost effective to buy low-income nurse or school teacher. I shouldn't have to say low-income and nurse and school teacher in the same sentence, but I do. It would be more economic for the federal government to subsidise them buying a $38,000 BYD, which has a 40 kilowatt-hour battery, which dollar per kilowatt-hour battery deployed is cheaper than they'll do in the community battery program.
And Saul, when you do the maths, when you buy an EV like that, you're buying a battery and the car comes free of charge. Because if you'd had to go and just buy the battery, it would have costed that amount anyway. So it's an extraordinary thing.
Thank you. This is a very practical question.
Oh, also the answer was march on Canberra with us. Sorry.
Back to my question. How do solar panels affect our landfill? What happens to them? I'm concerned about that.
Totally. It's a great question. So the Smart Energy Council has been engaged by the Queensland Government to put in place Australia's first statewide PV recycling program. So we're actually on the ground figuring this out now. But my view is that we actually don't have to figure it out because the rest of the world has already figured it out. And what they do in Europe is they have a mandatory, it's basically a container deposit scheme for solar panels. So when you buy a solar panel, you buy the solar panel for maybe $180 and you might pay an extra $7 or $8 for that panel. And that goes into a fund that grows over time, a bit like superannuation. So when that panel comes to end of life, there's a fund there to actually collect it and recycle it, because basically everything inside the solar panel is recyclable. Aluminium, glass, copper, silver, and the silicon itself. So all of it's recyclable. And so if we have a national scheme, set it up now so that we don't solve one environmental problem and create another.
Sorry, I see this gentleman asking his question
Sophie.
over and over. Okay. Oh, okay.
I've got one for...
Sorry.
Hello, am I going? Yep. Sophie, I've got one for you. It's about kids. I've been reading recently that we're going to need a 10 times increase in solar panels, solar energy in Australia to really get where we want to go. It's 30 gigawatts. We've got about 3 gigawatts now. Where are we going to get the technicians to do this? Where are we going to educate the kids in the next 10 years to go into this area?
Great. Good question. Oh, Saul. Look at it. Yeah. Saul, I'll get you to answer this. But it is a huge, there's such a transition on. There's a transition of skills and experience and knowledge, all those types of things. And I should also say before you answer this, you two, is that we do have an incredible tradie workforce on the Northern Beaches. So I might get you to add in there, how will that sort of help stimulate our local economy as well by doing this transition? Hanya, this gentleman down the front has his hand up for a long while.
I'm going to make this question much bigger at some risk. So my dad is sitting in the front here. Australia paid for him to get a degree in wool and pastoral sciences so that he could help Australia have a very profitable textile industry when wool and cotton were, what we were going to export to the world. My mother is sitting next to him, or one seat away. She was paid by the Australian government to do her degree to become a school teacher to teach people. Closer to living memory, sorry, Mum and Dad, I was born in 1974 and the Australian government paid for me to become a metallurgist because we were in the game of building export industries for our metals, principally steel and aluminium. We used to have the confidence as a nation to invest in our people, not even with a HEX fee, just outright pay people to become the skills and the trades that we needed for our country and for our future. I don't know exactly how we should do this, but we used to do it and now we don't. We are short probably close to somewhere between 50 and 100,000 electricians and HVAC technicians to execute this transition, and they're the tradie jobs. We've also gutted TAFE, so that's where they would get some of their training. We don't have as many apprenticeship models as we used to, so we need 50 to 100,000 tradies. We probably need 5 to 10,000 chemical engineers, metallurgists, mechanical engineers, structural engineers, etc., etc. If we do this right, we will be very, very well placed in a very, very competitive 21st century, but it really means casting aside the last 20 years of education policy at every single level from kindergarten through university and postgraduate. My sister's also in the front row and she's amazing too, I forgot. But
She might have something to say.
So, Saul's right. Let's fill it locally first, absolutely. But the numbers are huge. If we look out to 2030, there could be 1 million jobs involved in the transition, because we're transitioning everything. Every part of the economy is going to be affected. When I was in India, we met with our peak industry body counterpart there. They've got a contract to train 30,000 solar technicians for Germany. And we met with IITB and Monash University. So if you do a PhD at either IITB in Mumbai and Monash, you get a PhD from both institutions. They've harmonised the standards and the recognition. So one is we probably can't do it all alone. We've got to work with others. But the other critical piece is this. The Smart Energy Council, we have a gender action plan. It's actually led by Nicolette, who's here with us tonight. And the Gender Action Plan is about harnessing all of our human resources, because in our sector, the statistics are dismal. Around 30% of everybody in our sector is female, and when it comes to the technical trades, about 2%. We can't make this transition if we don't harness everybody, and it's a big part of the transition story.
Sophie, I'd just like to congratulate you on organising a tremendous conference here. It's really fantastic, and it's so great to see a guy in his sand shoes sitting up there taking on the politicians. But you and I last met charging our Teslas in Goldberg. But my question is, or my statement is, I've heard people say that if you buy an internal combustion engine today, in 10 years' time you won't be able to sell it. Now, I've got a lot of vintage cars. I know they last forever, but I just want to go back one point that probably a lot of you have experienced. When you take your car, your VW or BMW in for service, the service level is pathetic. I know guys who've waited 3 months just to get an appointment to inspect their car. The reason is those companies make 6% profit on their cars. The EVs like Tesla makes 20%. So the guys who used to sell their cars like Honda through a dealer network, that dealer network made money selling their cars and they could provide a service. But they're not making that money anymore because they've got to compete with Tesla and sell online. So the dealers aren't making money. They don't have the money to be able to get their mechanics skilled up to do it, and they don't have the spare parts to do it. So just be careful if you're going to buy an EV, an internal combustion engine. Thank you.
8 weeks ago, I was in China. I was in Xiamen and Shanghai. I know because I fell over and broke my radial head, so I know the date well. And in both of those cities, now they're coastal cities on the more developed end of China, but in both of those cities, I did a little survey. I sat in the car and I just looked at how many EVs were on the road. And in both places, 30% of the vehicles on the road were EVs. Passenger vehicles, light commercial, trucks, buses, the entire fleet. And I'm driving from the airport in Shanghai, and I look over and there's a BMW SUV that pulled up next to me. And I thought, a day ago, that would have been a car that I would have aspired to drive, right? That's a fantastic, fancy car. And now it looks like a piece of junk, because there are two types of cars. There are cars that look like spaceships and internal combustion engine cars. This transition is going to happen much quicker than you think, and actually China's going to win the race because there's already 4 or 5 companies there selling millions of these per year. They're no longer subsidised, and my prediction is by 2030 you're going to be driving a car with a brand name you probably haven't heard of today. So the transition's on.
Thank you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I thought I would just ask Saul very briefly about the pilot that you're running in your own suburb in Austinmere. What is it, 5121? You guys know more than me.
Electrified 2515. We are hoping to run a pilot. So you can hear from John and I and Sophie today that the transition is on. If you went out and paid retail price for all of the solutions, the 5 things I asked you to buy earlier, right now today, the prices are just 5 or 10% too high, and it doesn't quite work. But we don't really know how to make sure all of the glue in the community, how many chargers do you need at Coles and Woolies and the IGA? How many do you need at Dave's paint shop? How many, how do you integrate all of those things to give a functioning 100% reliable energy system? So we were hoping to accelerate the electrification of one community, help bring the economics down, help model out all of the remaining solutions. And that was the idea a couple of years ago to electrify 2515. The glorious thing is, through sibling rivalry and other mechanisms around Australia, we now have Electrify Mackellar, Rewire Canberra. There's a whole lot of other communities that want to join this. We were promised $8 million from Matt Keane to help do our community. That money disappeared after the change of government. Shock horror. So currently, where the community is doing it for themselves, we're still doing it, and we actually you see a real uptick in electric vehicles. I walk on the beach with my dog every morning, and every other morning someone's like, I just electrified the stove, I did the water heater. I think a huge amount of it is awareness. So we're winning with the awareness campaign. I think the Electrify 2515, these types of events, Electrify Mackellar, are actually changing the politics in Canberra. I've had that told to me specifically by the Energy Minister, by the Minister for Electrification, and by the Treasurer. So they are hearing us, which is really good. But no, we're not really getting a little bit of help to do the pilot the way we'd like. Maybe you can help us do that.
Yes. Thank you, Saul. And I am very aware we've got Saul's sister Selena here, who is doing something in our electorate as well, Electrify Mackellar. If you would like to say a couple of words, that would be great. But I might, just before I get you up, I will ask very quickly. We're out of time. Jamie, would you like to ask a brief question?
I'd love to, yeah. Thanks so much. And firstly, congratulations on a fantastic event, Jamie Dury. Saul, it might be the horticulturalist in me, but I feel like we need to propagate you and drop you in every country around the planet so that you can help make policy change worldwide. Well done, mate. I've been an Avalon local for 23 years now. We built a house about 15 years ago that was grid independent, solar powered, up here in a very sunny spot where we had plenty of sunshine all day, and it was great. Now we're building in a space where we have lots of trees. We love the trees. Should we not be pointing a little more awareness into geothermal energy and one of the benefits of that in terms of domesticising it and creating more awareness around geothermal across domestic areas across Australia? What are your thoughts?
Firstly, when you were saying propagating Saul and replicate me around the world, I'm uncomfortably going to say the word New Zealand, because we've just started rewiring New Zealand. So we now have rewiring America, Australia, New Zealand. So we are trying to propagate the movement and sort of make this ambition that begets more ambition. On geothermal there's two different types of geothermal energy. There's geothermal energy that can help you heat your home cheaper. So this is more relevant in North America and Europe than it is here. But if you dig down 4 feet or so, the temperature of the soil is extremely constant year-round. I'm trying to do the conversions in my head, probably 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. And if you use that as the source of heat for your heat pump, the heat pump's enormously effective, and you can use it to heat your house in the winter at very, very low cost, extremely efficiently. The technology to make that really deployable in every house isn't quite there economically. There's a group called Dandelion in the northeast in New England in the US trying to do it. Maybe they'll get there. I'm a big fan of that. In Europe, they're looking at basically building geothermal loops for whole cities and towns. It's actually a reasonable idea. Probably that economics might work in Melbourne. Unclear if it happens in Sydney. So I'm a fan of all of those shots on goal. Will it be the biggest contributor? No. Is it important? Yes. The other geothermal is the one where you drill big holes down to super hot reservoirs, and you can basically make 100% reliable, 100% on energy from the turning that heat into electricity through basically a steam engine. that technology has come a long way. It is getting cheaper and cheaper, but it's producing at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, the best projects in the world. Will it get cheap enough to compete with your rooftop solar? No. Will it get cheap enough to compete with the grid? Yes. Should we be doing some? Yes. Does Australia have good resources? Yes. So I'm not anti-geothermal. I just don't say it a lot because it won't be the big player, but it's certainly a wonderful supporting cast.
Okay, great. And just to finish up, we'll hear from Selena, if you're happy.
Oh, no, sorry. So my sister, sign up in the back. So one of the things we're trying to do, if we're going to march, we need to know where you live. And what Electrify 2515 found was, just connecting people so they can have these conversations themselves is really useful. So my sister is with her friends and volunteers trying to kick up Electrify Mackellar. There's a table in the back. Go put your name on it, an email address, a phone number, and you'll receive wonderful hints on how to make 5 really good decisions in 10 years.
What better to drive change than sibling rivalry? Come on, Mackellar. So that wraps it up for tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. It has been, I really hope that we've inspired you to make a change. There is a bright future ahead. There is a way to get there. So let's all get aboard the clean energy wave and build a better future. Thank you both so much for all your expertise for coming along today.
Thank you, Sophie.